Chapter 2 of Your Wildest Dreams, A Parkinson's Love Story by Michelle Terrill-Heath, 1974 and 1975. I'm off, I called to the Myers family, who were all still at the breakfast table. The smell of pan-fried sausage lingered in the air. Bye, Michelle, Jeannie answered. I'm working late tonight, so can you be here when Janet returns from school? Jeannie was a nurse, and Janet was her 10-year-old daughter, who I shared a room with in trade for occasional kid-sitting. Sure, I'll be home, I replied. I was 17 and working as a ski instructor at Aspen Highland Ski Area. It was 1974. It was only 2 blocks from my house to the bus stop, where crowds of tourists and I waited for the free shuttle to take us several miles to the base of Highland Ski Area. I clumped along in my ski boots, carrying my skis over my shoulder, and marveled that I was really living in Aspen. My large sunglasses kept my light blue eyes safe from the high-altitude rays as I shimmied my way towards the front of the crowd, waiting for the bus. I was wearing blue jeans, a ski sweater, and a purple instructor's parka. I hope I don't get in trouble again, I thought, remembering my supervisor's words a few days back. Michelle, the blue jeans have to go. It isn't a professional look. You're a good instructor, but you have to buy yourself some ski pants. At 5 feet 10 inches tall, skinny, with blonde hair, I knew I stood out in a crowd already, and I felt shy wearing the tight ski pants that were in fashion. All my life, I only wanted to fit in and not call attention to myself. Somehow, that never happened. Michelle, do you want a lift? I looked up from my reverie and saw Bill, a guy I'd recently skied with, in the passenger seat of a very red sports car. It was a cute convertible with the top down. The driver was cuter than the car. Yes, I said. I added my skis to theirs, the pile sticking out of the back seat, and climbed onto Bill's lap, my ski-booted feet barely fitting in. Every person waiting for the bus was staring at the spectacle of this tall 17-year-old ski instructor climbing into a Porsche Speedster already at capacity with 2 long-haired, wolfishly handsome, certainly stoned men. So much for blending in, I thought, as Andy, the driver, peeled away with a flourish. My eyes watered from the freezing wind, and talking was impossible. But what a ride it was. Bill and Andy dropped me off at the base of the mountain. I felt like I had just experienced something huge and no one else knew. I walked to my meeting, feeling recklessly awakened and enormously curious about those guys. It turned out that I wasn't the only curious one, and after only a short while, Andy picked me up again in his cute car. He happened to be driving around a block in downtown Aspen over and over, waiting for Bill to come out of a store, when I walked by and said hi. Traffic was building up behind him, so I got in the car and rode for a few loops around the block. The top was down, and some kids were throwing snowballs at us, which made us laugh and duck. When Bill showed up and I slid out of the passenger seat, Andy said, "This is the worst trade I've ever made." A couple days later, I didn't have a class to teach and went off to ski a few runs by myself. On my first run, I noticed a fallen skier struggling, so I stopped to help her. A few moments later, Andy skied up. We helped the lady and then continued skiing together the rest of that day. Andy talked a lot. He's the type of guy who always has a story one can get lost in. I talked too, but mostly listened, and I liked that. At the end of our ski day, we stood at the top of the last run. It was obvious neither of us felt like parting. "Do you want to come to my house for dinner tonight?" he asked. "That sounds great," I said. "But tonight the family I live with asked me to hang out with their out-of-town friend's daughter. She's my age, but I haven't met her yet. She can come too, and I'll invite Bill." "Great," I said. "I'll stop by City Market and pick up some meat, and I already have the fixings for other dishes. Maybe come over around 7. "I don't need meat," I said. "I'm a vegetarian." "You may not need meat," Andy replied, "but I need meat." "Okay, then," I answered. "We'll see you at 7. He gave me directions to his house, and we skied away from each other at the bottom of the mountain. After I arrived home, the visiting family was already there. Donna was super nice, and we immediately hit it off. She was excited to be going out with me. I remember that her father really wanted her to become a pharmacist. and he was convinced this would be her ticket to a great life. Donna wasn't so sure. We walked about 20 blocks to the other side of town. The streets were snow-filled. Softly falling snowflakes lit by street lights and sparkling landed in our hair and eyelashes. There weren't many cars out, so we could walk in the street, and we chatted, getting to know each other. We were the same age, but our lives were very different because I was out of high school and living on my own. Donna said, "I'm a little jealous of your life." We eventually found ourselves in front of Andy's house. Even in the dark, it was adorable. I could see that the house was painted blue, my favorite color. Aspen was famous for its many gingerbread Victorian houses, and this looked like a classic example. We kicked snow off our boots at the front porch and knocked on the door. The door opened and Andy's smiling face greeted us. Straight ahead in a big chair in the kitchen sat Bill. He was an amputee and had a fake leg that he was fiddling with. Bill was going to the first ever ski Paralympics, and he was trying different fit combinations to make skiing better. He was in training. His leg had been shot when he was only 19 and a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, and that night I learned that Andy had also been a soldier in Nam, as they called it. The house was in pleasant disrepair. Curtains hung in some doorways, dividing spaces so more people could live there comfortably. The kitchen was a warm and cozy room in the middle of the house, so that was where we gathered. There was a large floor grate that blew heated air up into the house, and I settled into the comfort of a plush chair near it. Andy was cooking, and delicious aromas filled the space as Bill talked about his ski training. Donna took to this cozy setting like a fish to water. She and Bill chatted away like old friends, and I was able to observe and relax. We were offered beer, and Donna accepted. I had started to feel a little woozy and asked for herbal tea, which was given to me in an English teacup. Everything was perfect and fun, except for me. I began to feel weak and breathless. My throat started to burn with a familiar sick soreness. The tea tasted good, but I was getting hot all over, and the party I sat in the middle of seemed to be getting further and further away. I caught Andy's eye and said, "Not feeling very well. Is there a place I could lie down?" He led me back toward the front of the house, and behind one of the curtained archways was a bed. "This is Rose's room. She's out of town," he said. I lay down gratefully and spent the rest of the evening in my borrowed bed. Because there were only curtains for doors, I could hear some of the party of three carrying on without me as I drifted in and out of feverish sweats and chills. Laughter erupted and spilled out into my sick room and made me sad. I heard Donna's voice saying, "I just love bluegrass music, too." I didn't even know what bluegrass music was. In my sick haze, I thought Donna was so much more who these guys would like. She was fun and talkative and knowledgeable, and she drank beer and knew what bluegrass music was, and she probably ate meat. Oh well, I said to myself as I fell into a coma-like sleep. Before I knew it, I was being shaken awake. Andy's voice broke through. "Wake up, Michelle. It's time for me to drive you home." In my mind, he and Donna were already a couple, and I felt like the third wheel as we piled into the Porsche and he drove us home. As Donna and I walked inside together, she told me how much fun it had been and that she thought Andy liked me. She also said their housemate Rose is moving out, so maybe you could move in there. I heard her, but I was wondering if I'd ever see Andy again. I felt left out. I ended up getting strep throat 5 times that winter. My sicknesses were like markers during early 1974. My life was changing and evolving at light speed, and although I didn't feel it at the time, I see now that getting sick gave me moments of pause to absorb my new reality. The day after the disastrous dinner, Donna and her parents left, and I got back into my routine of teaching skiing every day and helping out at the Myers house as needed. Our evenings were quiet and peaceful. After eating dinner together and cleaning up, Janet did homework, Jeannie and I would read books, and Art would sit in his easy chair near the window, either reading the paper or watching TV. "Someone's coming to the door," he announced that evening. "Looks like someone for you, Michelle." Puzzled, I went and opened the door. There stood Andy. "Do you want to go for a walk?" he asked. "I have some friends I'd like you to meet." Yes, I said quickly and went to get my coat. I was so surprised to see him that I forgot to be nervous, and we walked along companionably to a house in the middle of downtown Aspen. The house was painted black, and no one answered when we knocked on the door. My artist friends live here, Andy explained. Since they're not home, let's go somewhere else. We walked to a pet store owned by another friend of Andy's named Ed. He was there, and the store was open, and it was an enchanting place. An African gray parrot named Thorn kept everything lively by repeating phrases he'd heard at the shop that day. I watched Thorn perform his favorite trick. Ed let his 2 German short-haired dogs out to run, and they flew out the door like an express train barreling down the tracks, only to have the bird mimic Ed's whistle for them to return. All I could do was laugh as the dogs tumbled back toward us. There was a loft room above the shop, and we sat there together having tea and playing cribbage. Every moment I spent with Andy felt special. The next evening, Art said, "Here comes Andy again, Michelle." I threw on my coat and was ready when he knocked. It was a wonderful way to be courted. At the Black House that evening, I met Stuart, the building artist, and Fritz, the painting artist. These guys were creating a magical space together, and I was impressed. I was escorted into a room that felt like being in another universe. Dolly-inspired scenes of sunrises and sunsets and vividly colored creatures that looked real decorated each wall. Big soft cushions were the only furnishings, and the lighting was bright on the art and dim in the room. Next to this art room was an enclosed porch that was full of doves, their musical cooing just the right soundtrack for the magical setting. This time, after walking me home, Andy kissed me, one lingering kiss on my lips that was completely welcome, and I have never forgotten. Over time, Stuart's and Fritz's house became a place where Andy and I spent a lot of time. Every time Andy would come pick me up from the Myers house, whether going to the artist's house, the movies, out for Mexican food, or to Andy's house to be alone, I found myself not wanting our time together to end. One evening, as Andy and I lay around kissing, he said, "How old are you?" 17, I said. He looked astonished, and I already knew in the short time I'd known him that he wasn't easily shocked. "Did you finish high school?" he asked. "I did," I said. "How old are you?" 29 in a week, he answered. I was amazed. He was so old. It took a few minutes for us to get used to this knowledge, and then we slipped back easily to getting to know one another. Eventually, I met Rose, whose bed I'd lay in while sick during that first dinner. Her room was indeed available for rent, and I moved in. Andy and I spent the rest of the winter living together as a couple and navigating the unlimited choices available to 2 people who don't have careers or children. We had many things in common: a love for skiing, a desire to live in nature's beauty, a curiosity about cooking, a passion for reading books and learning, and a love of mentally stimulating conversation. I never looked very far forward. I simply enjoyed the moments as they came along. Because I was living moment by moment, I was completely surprised when, on one warm, late March afternoon, Andy very nicely asked me what my plans were at the end of the ski season, which was quickly approaching. "Plans?" I asked, as if being shaken out of a dream. "I have no plans." He plowed forward and said, "I have a job waiting for me on Catalina Island." "Where is that?" I asked. "It's off the Southern California coast," he answered. "I'd like you to live there too, and I can get you a job if you want. A group of us are going camping in Utah and Arizona at the end of ski season, and I'm hoping you will come along on that trip too, and then go to Catalina." I had been to Southern California one time 5 years earlier when I was 12. I had visited family friends, went to Disneyland, and remembered lots of gardenia flowers, which I loved. Island, I thought. I pictured something small. "That sounds wonderful," I told him. "I will think about it and let you know." Camping sounded fun too. I wondered if my parents would let me go on a trip like that. "I don't think so," I quickly concluded. I knew that my family, as newly born-again Christians, would never accept my boyfriend unless we got married. I wanted to get married one day, but wasn't ready just then. I was still only 17. I needed to fly back to Chicago for some medical tests and family time, so I told Andy that I wanted to come to Catalina Island and live with him for the summer but I had to go home first. He agreed, and the end of ski season, I flew to Chicago. Just as my life had moved in new directions, so had my family's. I returned to a house they had moved into while I was away. There was a new and lovely room built just for me. My Narnia poster was on the wall, and my hand-carved trunk was on the floor. It was perfect, but I spent my entire time home missing Andy. Why was I so different from the rest of my family? Why couldn't I stay in my perfect room and build a life there with my family? Spooky, my black cat, jumped into my lap and started purring. Spooky and my grandmother Nana were the only parts of being there that truly felt like home to me. I finally got up the courage to ask my mom and dad about going camping with Andy and friends in a week or two. One step at a time, I thought. I couldn't even imagine approaching them about moving to Catalina Island. Mom and Dad, can we talk for a minute? I asked. We sat formally on the upholstered furniture. I looked out the bay windows and saw green grass and tulips. It's great seeing everybody, I began. I'm also missing my friends, and especially Andy. He and some other friends are going to go camping to some amazing canyons in Utah and Arizona in a couple weeks. I really want to go. I have the money, and it sounds fun. I think you should be finding a job here and saving before you start college, Dad said. Oh, I had forgotten about college. I had been accepted to a school that specialized in acting and theater. However, I was not interested in moving to Boston. Well, I really want to go on this camping trip, I said again. I've never seen the Southwest and the beautiful canyons, and I think this is an opportunity I want to take. Michelle, we don't want you to go with Andy and your friends on this camping trip because of sexual temptation, Dad stated. How awkward. I burst into tears and said, Andy isn't pressuring me. You don't know him. You may not go, and that is final. I retreated to my perfect room. The next day, my mom and Dad approached me. Mom said, we have an idea that may resolve our disagreement. Dad has a free trip to Las Vegas, and we can bring you along next week. That way you can see some of the Southwest, and it will be a lot more luxurious than camping. Maybe Andy would be able to come there and see me, I thought. That would be great, I said. I figured that being closer to Andy was better than further away. My life was so confusing, and this seemed like maybe it could be a step in the right direction. I never received another phone call from Andy before we left the next week. Mom, Dad, and I flew to Las Vegas. It was not beautiful from the air. As the three of us were checking into the MGM Grand Hotel and Casino, the clerk perked up when she heard our names. Mr. Andy Heath left a message for Michelle Terrill. Is that you? My heart beat faster as he handed me a piece of paper with a message, but I saw my parents' faces in exuberance fall. It felt like a miracle as I held that paper with a phone number written on it and a note that said, call as soon as you can. We went up to our adjoining luxurious rooms and settled in before I went back down to the lobby to phone Andy. Thank goodness I had earned my own money. I got change and called from a payphone. Hello, he answered. Oh my gosh, Andy, how did you ever find me? I'm in Las Vegas with my parents, but I hadn't heard from you in a while, and I had no idea how to get in touch, I said. We've been camping in some pretty remote areas without any phones nearby, he explained. This morning we came into a town and I phoned your house, and your little brother gave me all the information about where you'd gone. I phoned the hotel to leave you a message, and ever since I've been sitting by this phone booth in the middle of nowhere hoping you would call. Wow, I replied. At least my parents had never told Jeff not to tell anyone where we were going. I can be there tomorrow early afternoon to pick you up, Andy offered. We have another week of camping, and then we'll end up in San Francisco to visit my father, and I'd love you to meet him. That all sounds wonderful, I said. Mom and Dad don't want me to go, but I'll figure something out. See you tomorrow. After hanging up, I felt both euphoria and sick to my stomach. Once I was back with my parents, I did not beat around the bush. I told them Andy was coming tomorrow, and I intended to go with him. I explained that I'd fly back to Chicago from San Francisco, and we could talk about college then. This is something I really want to do, I told them. I've saved my money and I can afford it, and you are making too much out of a simple camping trip with friends. Young lady, my dad said, if you go, don't ever come back. His words cut me like a knife in a surprise attack. My eyes filled with tears, and my mom looked at me with her hazel eyes, pleading me to stay. I thought about Andy. For me, it wasn't even a question. I would go. We had an awkward day and evening. I think I went swimming and sunning and read my book. I think we ate dinner. I remember going to sleep in my giant round bed that was raised on a pedestal. I fell asleep, my sad and resigned expression reflected at me from the mirror on the ceiling. In the morning, I remembered thinking that it would be the last time I would ever see my parents. In some ways, those moments of packing and waiting for Andy to arrive felt like I was acting in a play. That feeling of being an actress removed from reality was probably what allowed me to go through with leaving that day. I awaited Andy's arrival as my parents ate lunch in a restaurant. When I saw him, I flew across the room, and when we embraced, I immediately felt at peace. Of course, he had no idea about all the drama and heartache he was walking into, and I said nothing to reveal any of it to him. Manners were the only thing that got us through the introductions. The four of us went up the elevator, very civilized, and into my room to get my suitcase. Hugging my parents goodbye was heart-wrenching. My mom whispered in my ear, "I feel better having met him." My dad said nothing. We left. I don't think I breathed at all until we got into Andy's Porsche and started driving toward the Grand Canyon, where we were to meet our friends. I was a young woman conflicted. I was with the man I believed was my true love, and I had just walked away from all the love and family security I knew. Thankfully, I could not see ahead to what was still to come. The one thought that gave me peace was that I was being true to myself, and I knew the love between me and Andy was real. What I was too young and inexperienced to understand yet was the cycle of pain that was being put into motion and would have to play out over time. We drove that Porsche fast through the desert and into the night. I never revealed the pain I felt in leaving my parents in such a horrible way. I was willingly caught up in exploring the new adventure I had chosen. Late that night, we found our friends at the Aspen Loop in the Mather Campground of Grand Canyon National Park. The area being named after the town where we met was a lucky fluke. In this time, without cell phones or GPS systems, there was only common sense and intuition to guide us. When we saw the sign saying Aspen Loop, we headed directly there and found our friends sitting by their campfire. It was a very dark, moonless night, and I was exhausted. Andy and I got into our Eddie Bauer down sleeping bags, and after wiggling my body to fit into the natural hillocks and bumps of the unpadded ground, I fell into a deep sleep. Our friends awakened us before dawn to go to the rim and see the sunrise in the canyon. We left the cocoons of our sleeping bags and jumped into our warmest clothes. At the rim, the sun's rays lit up the canyon spires. Cliff walls brightened, and the curtain of sun lowered, revealing raw umber and red ochre colors, undulations in the rock, and the depth of this grandest of all canyons. Eventually, the sun rose higher, and we went back to the campsite to eat oatmeal and drink coffee and pack up. Andy explained to me their routine of car camping. We usually only stay in a place for one night, at most two if we want to explore. Everyone wanted to stay for the sunrise this morning, but now we all want to get up to Sedona. We'll stay there a couple of days before driving the long haul to LA and then up the coast to George's place in San Francisco. George was Andy's dad, and San Francisco was the last destination of this trip, where I thought I'd fly back to Chicago. Now I wasn't sure I was welcome in Chicago anymore, and that was terrifying to me. We packed up Andy's green Porsche, and the rest of our group were ready to go too. Gary and June were in their VW bus, and Bill was driving his Audi with his bicycle on the roof. Oak Creek Canyon outside of Sedona was our first stop. We slept right next to the sparkling stream. The vast black sky was shining with starlight like pinpricks in a canopy. The next day, our routine included exploring the area, doing camping chores, reading, and talking about the ever-present campfire. After 2 nights, we drove into Sedona, and the 5 of us went in separate directions, agreeing to meet again at a certain time and place. Andy was looking for a new gas cap for his car, and each person except for me seemed to have a mission to accomplish before the next leg of our trip. I wandered around this cute tourist town and thought about my family. I missed my mom and felt horrible that I wasn't supposed to go back home. I decided to call them on the phone right then and there. It was especially awkward because I had to call them collect. I prayed that my mom would answer, but it was my dad's voice I first heard. "Hello?" I held my breath, wondering if he would accept the call. He did. "I'm in Sedona, Arizona, and I thought you and Mom might want to know that I'm okay." "Honey, I'm so glad you called," he said. "There are 5 of us on the trip, Dad, and we got to see the sunrise at the Grand Canyon. It was so pretty. We're going to drive to Los Angeles tomorrow and then up to San Francisco to stay with Andy's dad. I wanted to fly back home from there," I said. "That sounds great, Michelle. We love you madly," Dad said. I could hardly believe my ears. I breathed deeply after hanging up. I felt whole again, ecstatic, euphoric, joyous, peaceful, and full of light and love and new possibility. I was not banished from my family, and I was still here on a camping trip with Andy and friends. My world had somehow knit back together because of one phone call. I began walking toward our meeting place with a much lighter step and a happier heart. Driving across the desert proved to be uneventful and enjoyable. Andy's Porsche was comfortable. We traveled with the Moody Blues, Leon Russell, the Doors, and T-Rex accompanying our conversations. Andy was a talker, and he had ideas, opinions, and questions that were fascinating, sometimes challenging, always engaging. I was thrilled to be crossing the desert with this man. The landscape surprised me. So much was growing. I pictured a desert like the Sahara, and instead came face to face with mesquite, cacti, sage, birds, cliffs, mesas, and vivid color. Our hours of driving finally ended, and we arrived in San Francisco, where I got to meet Andy's dad. Just like my expectation of what the desert would be like, my expectation of George proved to be totally wrong. He had a strong British accent and peppered everything he said with profanity. He had a pile of Playboy magazines in his living room, and he smoked cigars and drank every day. He was generous and took us all to dinner. The main attraction of his chosen restaurant was the drinks they served. My being underage didn't seem to matter to anybody. I did not dislike George, but his personality caught me off guard because he was much rougher than Andy and completely opposite my own dad. I had made arrangements to fly back to Chicago that night after dinner. My plane left around midnight and was the cheap overnight flight. I told Andy I would get to Catalina as soon as possible, but I had to work some stuff out with my parents first. He understood. Dad picked me up from the airport in the freshness and clarity of the early morning. My eyes felt scratchy from the all-night flight. We ate chocolate donuts and sipped coffee together on the drive home. Our truce was unspoken, and we both knew now how high the stakes really were. Back at the house, I hugged my mom and went to my beautiful room and fell sound asleep until early afternoon. I was welcomed back into the family with my parents' open arms, lots of hugs and attention from my siblings. I missed Andy terribly all the time. I missed his crazy ideas, his way of thinking and talking, his smile, his loyalty and love for his friends. I missed the way I felt when I was with him, the adventure every day turned into when he was there, his hugs and kisses. I missed the music he played, sharing passages from books we were reading, and his delicious cooking from recipes he found in the James Beard cookbook. I missed his great knowledge on any possible subject that spontaneously cropped up. I missed driving with him in his Porsche and learning more and more about who this man, who I had fallen deeply in love with, was. By comparison, things in my family home seemed dull. Although it felt very natural being home, after all, I had been in high school only a year before, it felt like I no longer belonged there. I no longer had a reason to live there. I had some friends around and saw them from time to time, but my life in Aspen felt more like home to me than my family's house. My parents asked me a lot of questions over the next few weeks. Do you still want to be an actress? Are you planning to travel in England this summer and audition for theater schools? What about Emerson College? Are you planning to attend? Their queries were kind and gentle and well-meaning, but they never asked me how it felt being there, or if I missed Andy, or how my winter in Aspen had changed me. I was not confident enough to tell them these things without being asked. It felt like a whole different world had opened to me. It was alive and vibrant, and I belonged there. I did want to go to England and audition for theater schools because acting was my dream, and I wasn't ready to set that down. I wasn't certain at all about moving to Boston and going to college, but that felt very far away. It was only the end of April, and college wouldn't start until September. Really, I just wanted to join Andy and Catalina as soon as possible, but the love I had for my family and my fear of losing them made me consider sticking to their plan. We planned my trip to England for July, and I was busy filling out applications and resumes to secure audition dates at the schools I was interested in. After high school graduation and before moving to Aspen, I had attended the American Conservatory Theater School in San Francisco, and my love for that profession had increased, as had my acting ability. My parents had gifted me a trip to England when I graduated from high school, and I hadn't gone yet, so this summer seemed like the perfect time to go. During my time at home, I spoke regularly on the phone with Andy. He called me from a payphone in Catalina. "When are you coming here?" he always asked. "I've told people about you, and they're all excited to meet you, and I'm so looking forward to you being here. Every day I miss you, and every day there is something that happens here that I want to show you or share with you." "I want to be there too," I'd say. He would ask me, "How are your doctor's appointments going? Have you made your travel plans for England yet? When can you get here?" He never asked me what it felt like being with my family again, or how it was different for me being home now, and I was not brave enough to tell him these things. The divide between my family and the man I had fallen in love with had become uncrossable, and I had no idea how to get around it. I stayed with my family for as long as I could, until the phone calls from Andy began to come less frequently, and I knew I had to go to Catalina. It was almost June. Andy had told me there was a job working in the island snack bar waiting for me. I told my parents I was going, and they didn't like that at all. Regardless, I packed a bag and took a bus to the airport for the midnight flight to Los Angeles. It was not an easy task getting to LAX airport, from LAX airport to Long Beach, where the seaplanes flew to Catalina. It amazes me today that my young self was able to figure it out. I rode the buses around Los Angeles and got myself to the seaplane terminal, but still hadn't a clue how to navigate the waters that separated Andy from my family. It was fantastic to ride in the small seaplane, watching the island come into view. It was huge and had many hills, valleys, and coves. We flew low between the two sets of hills and through a valley opening. I saw some buildings and a dock by a harbor as we continued to the other side of the opening and glided down, gracefully skidding on the water until our plane came to a floating stop and motored toward a ramp where all of us passengers disembarked. I stood with my suitcase looking for Andy. The place we landed was called Cat Harbor, and there was nothing there but the seaplane landing ramp. I couldn't see any town or buildings. There was one vehicle, a van, and everyone, including the pilot, got on it. "Are you coming with us?" someone shouted to me. I shook my head no. I was too shy to ask where they were going when I had no idea where I was supposed to go. I hoped Andy would show up as I watched the van drive away in a cloud of dust, and I sat on my suitcase and read my book for a while. The sun got hotter. No one came as the time ticked on, until it seemed the only option was to start walking in the direction the van had gone. My suitcase was very heavy, but I plodded on, following the dirt track toward what looked like a bunch of big animals standing in the road further up. I gasped as I got closer. It was a herd of about 20 buffalo. I still couldn't see any people or buildings, and I was too scared to walk through a buffalo herd. I think I started to cry a little bit, and I took a much longer, more circuitous route off the road in order to avoid direct contact with these animals, who mostly ignored me. After what felt like forever walking and dragging my flowered suitcase, I came to a small village of houses and cabins and the dock we had flown over earlier. There were some people by the dock, so I walked over and asked if any of them knew Andy Heath. They pointed out the cabin where Andy lived, and I walked over and knocked on the door. "Hello," his voice said. "Come in." I opened the door. Looking shocked, he said, "You made it." He quickly enveloped me in a hug. "I met the van. Why weren't you on it?" How could I explain to him that I'd never been here, had no idea where the van was going, and was exhausted physically from flying all night, stretched thin emotionally from leaving my family under bad terms again. I had never been on an island before, and everything felt so new and strange. "I don't know," I said, "but I'm here now and I need to sleep." Excuse me. So that's what we did. Eventually, Andy's friend Gladys came by and woke us up. Andy, are you home? My eyes adjusted to bright sunlight streaming in around the yellow curtain that was not quite drawn closed over the big picture window. Come back in 15 minutes, Andy told her. I got up from the cozy, comfortably made bed and went over to my suitcase, which was set on the newly painted white plank floor. There were low, round wood tables, also painted white, on which sat exotic ceramic lamps that Andy showed me could be on brightly, or just the ceramic base could be lit with a dimmer setting. They were from Andy's travels when he was in the Army. We had a small bathroom, too, and before I went in there to wash up, I exclaimed over the wild but calm-inducing artistic interior walls that Andy had painted. There were 4 complementing colors of blue, painted in swirling shapes. The effect was magical and beautiful. It felt like being under the sea and up in the clouds all at once. This was my new home. Andy worked in the restaurant as a waiter, and I was to start in the snack bar in a day or 2. But after only a day there, Andy took all the wind out of my sails. I don't love you anymore. I don't know what happened, but I waited and waited for you to arrive, and after a while, I stopped caring. I was stunned. I definitely wasn't expecting those words from him. I had been feeling happy to be there, and suddenly I had no reason to be there and nowhere else to go. I felt destroyed inside and had no one to talk to about it or to cry with, except Andy. I went for a long walk by myself. I followed the high dirt road that bordered the cliffs and meandered for miles along the island coast. I like being on this island, I thought. The wide blue ocean and the captivating mix of colors spread below me. Kelp beds undulated in the water, and bright orange fish competed with the sun's sparkles. The ocean belonged to all of us, and I was falling in love with it. I began to feel at one with all this beauty, and I felt a small fountain of joy at being connected to a place so beautiful and so much bigger than myself. A seed had been planted during my walk, and I recognized a place for me in this world, but I still had no idea what to do. It's just me on my own, I realized. I don't want to go away. I'm still in love with Andy. I understood then that loving someone is not dependent on being loved back. I had fallen in love at first sight with the ocean. As I walked down the steep hill back to the Isthmus village, 2 new friends were waving at me from a picnic table and calling out to me to join them. I made my way over, and they offered me some fresh slices of cantaloupe. I had never tasted anything so delicious. With the sweet cantaloupe juice still on my hands, I recognized that I was home. Right there, I was home. I did not need Andy or anybody else to love me to be home. The ocean and island were there. I was there. I'm staying, I told Andy. However you feel is fine, and whatever you do is fine, but I'm staying here. We agreed I could live in his cabin and we'd be friends. As awkward as that was, I felt better being close to him. My adult life began there. It was wonderful. I met new friends while working at the snack bar and began integrating into life at the Isthmus. Pat, an older British lady, managed all of us snack bar girls with humor as she taught me to make pancakes, fried eggs, and coffee, and she cheered us all on as we served locals their breakfasts. "Good show, duckies," she'd say. Every morning, I immediately put on my bathing suit and walked straight out of our cabin about 20 yards to the water's edge. I never hesitated, just walked right into the cool, salty sea for a dip. I ate breakfast at the snack bar. The pancakes were my favorite. My shifts were during the day, and Andy worked at night, so our schedules gave us the space we needed to grow individually and the freedom to allow our love for each other either to be reawakened or disappear altogether. I felt free of worry and relaxed into an easy, fun life with new friends and coworkers. After a few weeks, I felt Andy falling in love with me again. Even so, I continued to enjoy my independence. When I wasn't working, I was reading books by Alan Watts, Aldous Huxley, and Jiddu Krishnamurti. Andy was a runner, encouraged me to run with him. I had never run before, either for training or fun, and found it challenging. My breathing would squeak in wheezy inhales. I got tired quickly. I stuck with it until one day it became slightly less unpleasant, and I slowly but surely became hooked. Andy and I also rowed together in a 2-person dory, And unlike running, that was pure joy right from the start. The only other sport I had experience with that I found was that much fun was downhill skiing. Rowing was a glide through the ocean in sync with each other. We'd go far and fast with our effort. Weeks flew by, and soon I was making plans to get to Chicago again for my flight to England. I had an open ticket, so my return could be determined while I was abroad. This was important because if I was accepted into a theater school, I was planning to move. It was obvious that Andy's love for me had been reawakened as we discussed this next separation. "I'm British, and if you move there, I will move there too," he told me. I left the island with more confidence and joy. There was still that divide between my parents and my boyfriend, but I moved forward with renewed strength and clarity.